Tonight shows a prisoner dishing out his own brand of justice to a convicted offender. The man had just been sentenced to 15 years in prison for sexually assaulting a girl.
In 1993, Colin Hatch lured Sean Williams to his tower block home in Norfolk Close, Finchley, North London, after which he abducted, sexually assaulted, and then choked him to death. Here's some filthy child predators and what happens to them in prison. March 2005. A woman contacts Florida's Palm Beach Police Department and alleged that her stepdaughter had been taken to Epstein's mansion, where she was molested. However, this was just one out of the many that became victims of Epstein's sexual assault. Born in 1953 in Brooklyn, New York, Jeffrey Epstein's early life was pretty unremarkable. He attended college but ended up dropping out to teach math and physics at the prestigious Dalton School in Manhattan. This teaching stint was surprisingly pivotal. Epstein's charm and ambition caught the attention of Alan Greenberg, the CEO of Bear Stearns, one of the big players on Wall Street. Epstein joined Bear Stearns and climbed his way up, eventually establishing himself as a private financier for the rich and powerful. He became known for managing money for some of the wealthiest people, though how he built this vast wealth remains shrouded in mystery. The real twist to Epstein's story lies beneath his financial success. In the early 2000s, allegations against him began to surface. Women started coming forward, describing horrifying experiences at Epstein's lavish homes, particularly his mansion in Palm Beach, Florida, and his private island in the Caribbean. Now, these allegations suggested Epstein was running an extensive operation to exploit girls, many of whom were minors, involving some high-profile acquaintances. In 2008, Epstein was charged in Florida, facing potentially serious consequences. However, his legal team brokered a shocking plea deal that would become infamous. Epstein pled guilty to a lesser charge, serving only 13 months in a county jail with unusual privileges, allowing him to leave for work 6 days a week. And that sweetheart deal kept him off the radar, leaving victims feeling betrayed and unheard. Epstein's alleged crimes didn't fade quietly, though. In 2019, federal prosecutors reopened his case, driven by renewed public outrage and investigative journalism that questioned how he had evaded serious justice. Epstein was arrested on federal charges of trafficking, and for a moment it seemed like justice was finally catching up. However, just a month later, he was found dead in his cell. His death was officially ruled a suicide, but many doubts and conspiracy theories still swirl, fueled by the many powerful figures connected to him. However, Epstein's story doesn't end here. After his death, investigations into his estate and associates continued, pulling in others like his former girlfriend Ghislaine Maxwell into the spotlight for assisting Epstein in his exploitation of young women. Girls as young as 14 years old were groomed and abused by Maxwell and Epstein. Maxwell befriended the victims by taking them to the movies or on shopping trips. She also acclimated victims to Epstein's conduct simply by being there, which put her victims at ease by providing the assurance and comfort of an adult woman who seemingly approved of Epstein's behavior. Additionally, Epstein offered to help some victims by paying for their travel and/or educational opportunities, and Maxwell would encourage certain victims to accept Epstein's assistance. As a result, victims were made to feel indebted and believe that Maxwell and Epstein were trying to help them. These behaviors left their victims vulnerable and susceptible to sexual abuse by Epstein. Their victims endured and abuse at multiple locations, including Epstein's properties in New York, Florida, and New Mexico, as well as Maxwell's home in London, England. Maxwell's eventual conviction and sentencing only added another layer of complexity to the already tragic and deeply disturbing story. In 1993, Colin Hatch had lured 7-year-old Sean Williams to his tower block home, where he abducted, sexually assaulted, and then choked him to death. Born in 1973 in the UK, Colin Hatch had troubling behavior from a young age, especially toward children. By 18, he'd already been involved in serious incidents, flagged as a predator by authorities. Yet the justice system's leniency, short sentences and warnings, allowed him to avoid long-term consequences. And despite his alarming record, Hatch never underwent meaningful rehabilitation, leaving him free to continue his escalating crimes. In 1993, Hatch's crimes reached a horrifying turn when Sean Williams became his next victim in a case that would shock the UK. A murder that was committed shortly after Hatch was released on parole. Sean's tragic death underscored just how dangerous Hatch had become. His murder sparked outrage and exposed major flaws in how known offenders were monitored. Now, Hatch's record was well documented, yet the response to his actions was repeatedly inadequate. After Sean's death, Hatch was finally sentenced to life in prison, a decision that many felt was long overdue. However, his time behind bars wouldn't be easy. Hatch reportedly continued to agonize others around him, including the prison staff and inmates. Over the years, he'd become one of the most detested prisoners in the UK, isolated, and frequently moved due to the animosity he provoked. In 2011, Hatch's story takes another turn when Damien Folks, another inmate who reportedly targeted him as an act of vigilante justice, attacked Hatch in his cell. He stabbed him to death, ending the life of a man who many saw as irredeemable. Public reactions to Hatch's death were mixed, with many feeling relief that he could no longer pose a threat. But others would question how a prisoner with such a history was left vulnerable in a setting where tensions ran high. July 1st, 2000. Roy Whiting commits the horrific murder of Sarah Payne in West Sussex, England. Now, sadly, her tragic abduction and death might have been prevented if authorities had kept closer tabs on Whiting. We take you to January 26, 1959, in Horsham, West Sussex, England. Roy Whiting would grow up in a working-class family and struggle academically, leaving school with no qualifications. Described as a loner, Whiting held various manual jobs before his criminal behavior escalated, leading to a disturbing and violent trajectory. As a young adult, Whiting was known to have had a series of run-ins with the law. He would face several charges related to his inappropriate behavior toward young girls, including attempted abduction and sexual offenses. But despite those serious offenses, he often found himself slipping through the cracks of the legal system, receiving sentences that didn't seem to match the gravity of his crimes. On July 1st, 2000, Whiting became the center of national attention when he was convicted of kidnapping and murdering Sarah Payne. Now, Sarah had been playing outside with her siblings in West Sussex when she disappeared. Her body was discovered just over a week later, and the evidence quickly pointed to Whiting as the perpetrator. The investigation revealed that Whiting had lured Sarah into his house with the promise of showing her some kittens. Once inside, he committed the unthinkable, as he would sexually assault and eventually murder her. During his trial, it was shown that Whiting had previously been convicted of similar offenses, which led many to question how he had been allowed to live freely amongst the public. The case had sparked outrage, with many calling for tougher laws to protect children from predators. In 2001, Whiting was given life in prison with a recommendation that he serve a minimum of 40 years. Now, this was viewed by many as a small measure of justice for Sarah and her family. His case would lead to significant changes in the UK's legal framework regarding sex offenders and child protection laws. Now, while in prison, Whiting had continued to be a subject of public interest and media scrutiny. But at the same time, his life was filled with excruciating pain. On August 4th, 2002, while he was getting hot water at HMP Wakefield, Whiting was attacked with a razor by another inmate. This led to Ricky Tregaskis, a convicted murderer, being found guilty of the assault in June 2004. Tregaskis, who was already serving a life sentence for the murder of a disabled man in Cornwall, received an additional 6-year sentence for his attack on Whiting, which left a nice 6-inch scar on his right cheek. Fast forward to July 2011 and Whiting would be stabbed in the eye. Surprisingly, he chose not to file charges, which meant there was no police investigation, since his injuries were deemed non-life-threatening. Then, on November 8, 2018, he was attacked yet again at HMP Wakefield. This time, 2 inmates assaulted Whiting in his cell, and he had to be hospitalized for treatment. Fortunately for him, he returned to prison shortly after in stable condition. Most recently, on February 11, 2024, Whiting went through another attack, being stabbed yet again at HMP Wakefield. Now, those injuries would also be non-life-changing or threatening, and he's currently serving his 40-year sentence, with hopes of being eligible for parole in 2041 at the age of 82. February 13, 1962 would mark the day John Gagin's disturbing behavior was initially noticed by Anthony Benzovich, who reported him to church officials, accusing him of frequently taking boys into his bedroom. June 4, 1935, John Gagin was born in Boston to an Irish Catholic family. He lost his father when he was only 5 years old and was raised by his maternal uncle, Mark Cahan, who was a Catholic priest within the Archdiocese of Boston. Gagin attended Cardinal O'Connell Seminary with the intent of becoming a priest, although an assessment in 1954 noted him as having a very pronounced immaturity. He eventually graduated in 1962 and was ordained. Assigned to the Blessed Sacrament as a junior priest, Gagin was first reported by Anthony Benzovich, who was branded as a troublemaker for reporting him, and was threatened to be transferred to Peru if he persisted. Yet in 1995, Gagin admitted to having molested 4 boys during his tenure at Blessed Sacrament. Despite that atrocity, which is supposed to have earned him a due punishment, Gagin was still assigned to St. Bernard's Parish in Concord on September 22, 1966. However, he was transferred after 7 months without any explanation for his reassignment or church records. On April 20, 1967, Gagin was assigned to St. Paul's Parish in Hingham, and sometime later, around 1968, a man complained to church authorities that he had caught Gagin molesting his son. As a result, Gagin was sent to the Seton Institute in Baltimore, Maryland, for treatment on his pedophilia. Later in the 1970s, he was accused by parishioner Joanne Mueller for molesting her 4 innocent boys. But she was dismissed and asked to stay silent by Paul E. Michelli, and the church later reached a settlement with Mueller. Finally, after a 30-year career in 6 parishes, Gagin was accused of sexual abuse involving more than 130 boys. Those heinous crimes were made bare before the law as he was prosecuted in Cambridge for charges of molestation that took place in 1991. Gagin was defrocked in 1998 by Pope John Paul II. He was found guilty on February 21, 2002, of indecent assault and battery for grabbing the buttocks of a boy in a swimming pool at the Waltham Boys and Girls Club in 1991, and was sentenced to 9 to 10 years in prison. While in prison for this crime, he met an inmate by the name Lee Druce, who at the time was serving a lifetime prison term for murdering a man that tried to sexually abuse him. Now, Druce wasn't in here for just murder. He felt his crimes were personal, like he had to take revenge on all child molesters out there. Druce was said to have planned Gagin's death for a month, considering him a prize. An autopsy revealed Gagin's cause of death to be ligature strangulation and blunt chest trauma. The press raised questions about prison officials' judgment in placing these 2 men in the same unit for protective custody, knowing fully well Gagin was at risk after being warned by another inmate that Druce intended to attack Gagin. In 2006, Huckle kidnapped 2 sisters in Cambodia. These were just 2 of the 71 children he was accused of molesting. However, those gruesome crimes led to his terrible life in incarceration, which also led to his horrific demise. December 19, 2014, Huckle's arrested by officers from Britain's National Crime Agency at London's Gatwick Airport and questioned on suspicion of serious offenses against children. Now, his arrest followed an earlier tip-off from Task Force Argos, a highly specialized branch of Australia's Queensland Police Service, responsible for investigating online child exploitation and abuse. So Huckle initially refused to answer any questions and was bailed under the condition that he stayed at his parents' house, though his laptop was seized. The following day, he drunkenly admitted the child sex abuse to his mother, stating that he had abused several kids. Hearing such a hideous confession, his mother and father reacted with extreme anger and upset by contacting the police immediately to take him away. After leaving his parents' house, Huckle was rearrested and charged with 91 counts, including creation and possession of indecent images of children, rape of a child, digital penetration, sexual assault, and facilitating the commission of child sexual offenses by creating a Manuel. This guy was denied bail by police and remanded to court, where his next application for bail was also denied. Huckle was imprisoned at HMP Lewes, but because of the severity of charges, he was transferred to HMP Belmarsh in London to await trial. By October 13, 2019, Huckle was found dead in his cell at Full Sutton Prison in East Yorkshire. In January 2020, Paul Fitzgerald was charged with his murder and faced a trial that lasted for 4 days, while he was still himself serving an indeterminate sentence for sexual assault. On the 23rd of November 2020, Fitzgerald was found guilty of Huckle's murder by a jury after only 1 hour of deliberation. During the trial, further details were revealed, with it being made public that Huckle endured a lengthy torture, with his hands and feet bound before being gagged, strangled using an electrical cable, raped, having his jaw broken, being sodomized with a kitchen utensil, and then having a pen with a blade attached to it stabbed into his brain through the nose. That attack was described by the prosecution as a prolonged attack, also designed to humiliate and degrade Huckle. Fitzgerald, who was discovered by prison staff straddling Huckle's body and surrounded by a pool of blood, later admitted unapologetically that he had wanted to cook and eat his body parts following that attack. Eventually, on the 24th of November 2020, Fitzgerald was sentenced to life imprisonment for the horrific murder of Richard Huckle. March 2013. Mvin Bell commits a crime so horrific, it was described as one of the most evil things ever witnessed, and it would be that same troubled mind that led to his very own tragic demise. Mvin Bell, born in Western Australia's Kimberley region, had a troubling history of violence, substance abuse, and frequent brushes with the law. His relationship with Tamika Mullally, the mother of Charlie Mullally, was fraught with abuse and volatility. On the night of March 19, 2013, this heated argument escalates into a brutal assault when Bell viciously attacked Tamika, leaving her severely injured and naked. When police arrived, instead of prioritizing Charlie's safety, they arrested Tamika for disorderly conduct, a decision that was later condemned as a catastrophic failure. Bell took that opportunity to abduct Charlie and drive him through remote parts of the Kimberley. Over the next 15 hours, Bell had subjected Charlie to unimaginable abuse and torture. Charlie suffered fatal injuries, including a broken leg, severe internal trauma, and burns. Afterwards, Bell would abandon him on the side of the highway. Now, Charlie was discovered and rushed to a hospital, but he tragically died from his injuries. The case had ignited national outrage, highlighting both the horrific nature of the crime and the systemic failures in addressing domestic violence and protecting Indigenous women and children. The police response, particularly the mishandling of Tamika's case, faced intense scrutiny. In 2014, Bell was convicted of Charlie's murder. During that trial, the court heard gut-wrenching details of the crime, with the judge labeling Bell's actions as pure evil. He was given life in prison with no possibility of parole for 27 years, a sentence meant to reflect the sheer cruelty of his actions and his complete lack of remorse. Justice seemed to take a final turn, though, when Bell was found dead in his Casuarina prison cell on September 8, 2015. They found him hanging in the shower of his locked cell, and authorities ruled it a suicide. Convicted in 2013 for the molestation of a girl, David OAS Ramirez, a resident of Jacksonville, Florida, was widely known for his criminal activities. Now, David's criminal activities first came to public attention in the early 2000s, which led to numerous battles and attempts by authorities to bring him to justice. However, it'd be the 2012 case that firmly established his brutality and exposed his tactics when a young victim reported the abuse to her mother, who then alerted the police. His trial showed that he had manipulated and abused his victims, exploiting their vulnerability for his pleasure. Now, the jury found him guilty, and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Now, during his incarceration, Ramirez remained problematic. There were times when he was involved in various disciplinary issues, further complicating his sentence, but he had no idea what was coming up. In July 2019, While housed on the 5th floor of the jail at 500 E Adams Street, David found himself in this heated exchange of insults with fellow inmate Paul Dixon. What began as insults quickly escalated into real violence, with Dixon ultimately beating Ramirez to death. Now Dixon, who was already serving a life sentence for a previous murder, is now dealing with an additional murder charge, making his situation even more serious. On the evening of August 4th, 2002, near Soham Village College, Ian Huntley lured 2 girls into his house while they were out getting sweets. Once they were inside, he tragically ended their lives in a horrifying manner. Born January 31st, 1974, into a working-class home in Grimsby, England, in northeast Lincolnshire, Huntley was the eldest son of Kevin and Linda Huntley. Now, he had a turbulent time at school, often bullied for being asthmatic. The problem continued until age 13, and then he was forced to change schools. He eventually did leave school in 1990 and declined to continue his studies, despite reasonable grades, choosing to get a job instead. Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman passed by Huntley's house near Soham Village College while out buying those sweets. Now, Huntley saw the girls and invited them inside, claiming that his girlfriend, Maxine Carr, whom the girls knew from school, was at home. Meanwhile, Carr was actually away visiting her family, and as those girls walked into his house, Huntley murdered them, then transported their bodies about 20 miles away, disposed them in a ditch, and attempted to destroy that evidence by setting them ablaze. That night, Holly and Jessica were reported missing, and their search quickly became one of the most high-profile cases in British history. On August 17th, police arrested Huntley and Carr on suspicion of murder. Later that day, a gamekeeper discovered the girls' bodies near an air base close to Huntley's father's home. Autopsy suggested asphyxiation, though the bodies were too decomposed to confirm if they had been sexually assaulted. Their trials began on November 5, 2003, a case that attracted global attention. The prosecution presented extensive evidence, but 3 weeks into the trial, Huntley altered his story, saying that the girls did die in his house, but that their deaths were accidental. On December 17, 2003, the jury convicted Huntley, giving him 40 years minimum. Contrary to his claim, Huntley had reportedly admitted to his father that he lied in court. While in prison, Huntley experienced a lot of challenges, ranging from him being rushed to Pinderfields Hospital in Wakefield after being found unconscious from a suspected drug overdose in his cell in 2006, to being transferred in 2008 to Franklin Prison after he confessed in 2007 that he killed a girl after sexually assaulting her. But his troubles wouldn't stop here, because while in Franklin Prison, he faced hostilities from other inmates simply because his status as a chomo. The worst of it might have been in 2011. Although he managed to survive, fellow inmate Damian Folkst slashed Huntley's throat. Robert Munger's story is one of darkness and betrayal that really shocked Washington state. A 70-year-old man's crimes against children eventually lands him in prison and draws fierce reaction from the community and even fellow inmates. Now, Munger's criminal behavior came to light in 2019 when he was arrested following this investigation into his history of abuse. Authorities uncovered years of horrifying activities which would involve minors, including child molestation, sexual exploitation, and possession of child pornography. For a long time, Munger had managed to conceal his crimes. The investigation later showed that his offenses lasted years, leaving a legacy of trauma in his wake. In prison, Munger was assigned to Airway Heights Correction Center in Washington, but his reputation followed him inside. Crimes against children are often despised in prisons, where street justice often becomes a reality. Even within this harsh prison world, chomos are frequently isolated and are targets of hostility from other inmates. And Munger, now notorious for being a chomo, finds himself in a dangerous situation. His life took a grim turn in February 2021, when his cellmate, Shane Goldsby, confronts Munger on a dreadful issue in their shared space. Goldsby, who was serving time on charges stemming from a 2017 incident related to the hijacking of a police vehicle, revealed that one of Munger's victims was his younger sister. According to Goldsby, Munger had even bragged about his crimes, a revelation that triggered this intense and fatal response. Goldsby attacked Munger, killing him during the confrontation. Later admitting to the assault, he explained that Munger's words about his sister were just too much to bear. As word of Munger's death spread, the case sparked intense debate. Many people sympathized with Goldsby, understanding the overwhelming pain he must have endured, while some others criticized the system for allowing something like this to even happen.